Hello and welcome to the Byline podcast, coming this time from the Edinburgh Fringe, and I've got with me Matt Forde. Matt is a comedian, a cancer survivor, prolific podcast host, does the Absolute Radio rock and roll football show, former Labour Party organiser as well, and there is a personal connection here. Years ago, Matt and I used to work on Talk Sport together, flying the flag, I think it's fair to say, for progressive politics on a radio station that wasn't particularly known for it. How you doing, Matt? You all right?
I'm really good. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. Firstly, I just want to get your reaction to what's going on in the streets. I was going to say of Britain, but primarily the streets of England and a little bit in Northern Ireland.
I think it's terrifying. And it's just a reminder that when people realise that they can effectively organise or indeed just turn up at an agreed time and cause mayhem, that it can take the state a bit of time to respond. And I think the fact that this underpinning all this is really very dark politics, I find. I have faith that it will eventually fizzle out. I have no doubt people, have already been charged and convicted, and that we'll see many more of those. But in the meantime, I just think it's appalling and really scary.
I've talked on the podcast before about the mainstreaming of anti-Muslim sentiment, the othering of minorities, asylum seekers and refugees and so on. Some of it from very senior Conservative politicians. This hasn't just come from a tiny fragment on the far right.
No, it hasn't. People are responsible for their own actions, and anyone taking part of this, obviously, is responsible for their own behaviour. But I do worry about, particularly, as you say, anti-Muslim sentiment and the way that we talk about people who come here, the weaponising of the plight of people fleeing persecution. And also, as with any mob, they get stuff wrong. People saying that the guy was migrant, and he wasn't. He was British born.
Yeah, this was after the terrible murders in Southport, which people blamed on a migrant.
Yeah, and people can't admit that they've got stuff wrong. So they say, his parents were from Rwanda. You're like, well, that wasn't your original point. And then they're targeting hotels where people are staying. I just find it absolutely appalling. I find it just really scary. I just hope that this recedes as soon as possible. I hate seeing stuff like this happen in our country.
I personally can't remember a scarier time in my life in Britain, and I'm not a kid. My partner is South Asian. My kids are mixed heritage. I cannot remember ever being more scared about the state of the streets. Maybe when I was a teenager. Maybe times were violent and tough in the 80s. Perhaps that's a parallel, but certainly not for the last 30 odd years.
No, and I think you wonder what's coming next, and you wonder what else it'll inspire. That's the fear, is how do you walk down the street without worrying what people are going to say? Because if there's a sense that obviously it's a minority of people, but you sense that these people are emboldened and they really don't care about the consequences, well then what does that mean for anyone who doesn't look the way these people think is the correct way to look? So I find it very, very scary. I hate it.
I know on your political party podcast you've interviewed Keir Starmer
Yes.
more than once. What's your take of Keir Starmer as a person and how he's likely to rise to this very significant challenge?
Well, I think he is someone who's absolutely pragmatic. This is someone who's a problem solver and will want to sort the problem out. This is someone who made prosecuting criminals his life's work. He's the ideal person to have in charge at a time like this. Any sort of fear that he's going to be soft on crime, I think, is ultimately unfounded. I don't doubt that these people will face, as he says it, the full force of the law. I have confidence in him as an individual, but it's also the apparatus of the state, isn't it? It's the capability of the police and other agencies to prevent this stuff from happening. And there are times when actually the sort of scaffolding of the state can appear very weak at times, with the riots in Tottenham in 2011 and the riots that were across London and spread to Nottingham and other places. You thought, my God, there are periods actually where if enough people realise they want to get together and cause violent trouble, they're emboldened enough to do it, and they can drive the police back at times, and that is a very scary thing for residents to see. You think, well, if the police aren't going to stand here and defend me, I'm left totally at the mercy and the randomness of a mob. And that's what's petrifying. I don't doubt that in time this will be quelled. But at the moment, it feels like it's at fever pitch and we don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I mean, the structure of that state is being interfered with by social media. When you have people like Elon Musk saying it's a civil war, he isn't simply somebody who owns a platform. He's somebody who's actively intervening in that platform, might even be seen to be inciting disorder on the streets of Britain.
I think if you say civil war is inevitable, that's not a passive comment. You know what you're doing. And he knows what he's done to that platform. We've all seen it. We've all seen how worse it's become in terms of the content that we're exposed to. It incentivises extreme behaviour and extreme commentary on all sides. And the fact that someone doesn't live up to their responsibilities, he's well remunerated for the things that he does, Elon Musk. He should live up to that. Instead, he seems to be actively encouraging some of the worst people around the world. He seems to be on their side.
You talking about any of this in your current show here at the Fringe?
I've got a few lines about it. I mean, obviously it's a comedy show, so you want to, you have to deal with these things in a way that doesn't make light of them, but that you have to find the comedy in perhaps the political reaction or elsewhere, because you obviously feel for the people in that hotel. You feel for the people that are scared in the cities and towns where it hasn't happened yet, let alone in the places where it has.
I think there were 2 incidents of attempted arsons on hotels. There was housing asylum seekers. There was one in Rotherham, another one in Tamworth as well.
But this is the problem: is you walk past these people in the street, you've got no idea what their opinions are, and at the moment they're emboldened and they realise that actually there's enough of them to cause serious damage. And they're in a minority in our country, but they're very dangerous people. They will do things the rest of us won't do. They are violent. They care less about consequences. They are driven by that hatred and that desire to do real, genuine, physical damage to other people. I think that's what's so scary. Is this isn't just people chanting. That would be scary enough. You see the lengths they're prepared to go to. I just find it a really dark experience. I find it really chilling. I don't think really I've fully processed the horror of it, so I can't imagine what it's like for people a lot closer to it.
I think one of the things that's disturbed me, and you and I have both hosted radio phone-ins and you invite comment from people, but the contextualising of all this as in some way protest, it's not really protest, is it? It seems to me that what's happening, the closest analogy I draw is that of pogroms, the things we associated with attacks on Jewish people in Eastern Europe in history. People are being targeted on account of their skin colour or where they have come from.
Protest is such an inappropriate word. It's a riot. This is an element of it's reminiscent of a football hooligan element plus that, as you say, that far-right element where they're not protesting. This is people delighting in violence and mayhem. This isn't people marching from the BBC to Trafalgar Square to make a point about a policy. This is something far more severe. I think the word protest is completely inappropriate.
By way of contrast, I know that you interviewed 650 candidates for the 2024 election, one from every constituency, not necessarily the winner. You had some big names, didn't you? West Streeting was one of them. What did you take away from that exercise in democracy?
Well, I tried to interview 650. I managed about 150. So I failed to hit my target. Well, I'm positive about politics overall and always have been. And what I took away from it was that there were fantastic, talented, motivated, driven people in all political parties who wanted to make the country a better place. And I found it a really refreshing antidote to a lot of the national coverage, which I just found completely depressing. And I think a lot of the national coverage didn't reflect the conversation the country was actually having. I don't think, people didn't care what happened in the debates. What they cared about was the fact that everything costs a fortune, that they can't get a doctor's appointment. And the day-to-day psychodrama of whether Rishi Sunak had a better debate than Keir Starmer was irrelevant to people's lives. People are living in really difficult circumstances, and increasingly more people are. That was the conversation the country was having, and that's why Labour won.
Who are you most impressed by?
A lot of them really impressed me. There were some really good young candidates from all parties. Do you know what? I really respected, just in general, people who were standing in seats where they had no chance of winning. Because I just thought, good for you. You know, the Tory candidate standing in Leeds in this election, you thought, my God, you know, that is so hard. That's not 2019. A lot's happened in those 5 years. But you thought that your values needed to be defended, even in an unwinnable seat, and you wanted to give the people that share your values and ideas the chance to vote for them. And you know, there was a young Green candidate interviewed down in the southwest, similar. You know, people at 18, 19 standing for Parliament because they really believe in putting environmental issues on the ballot paper, and I found it really inspiring. And there were candidates. It was an equal spread really across the major parties of people that I was really impressed by.
Yeah, I think that's one of the disturbing things about what's been happening on the streets, isn't it? Is that we have actually just had a general election, and you and I have been around the block. We don't pretend that the way our parliamentary democracy works is in any way perfect. We know that it isn't, but I always use the analogy of there's a bus coming along. There's 6 buses coming along. Which one will take you closest to your destination? None of them go to your house. You can choose the one that goes closest to your destination. To expect perfection in politics it seems to me, absurd. But it can make things better. Politics works.
That's what it exists for. It's a problem-solving exercise. And every few years we get the choice to elect people based on the party ticket. So obviously people who feel more left-wing are more likely to vote Labour. But there are always votes for grabs in the middle. And I think those people just think, who do I think will be more competent? Who's really going to change things in a positive way? So there's always that mix of values plus a hard-headed calculation on who is most appropriate to run the country. And I find that really inspiring, and the fact that we have a civil service and the public sector and the people that still deliver things regardless of the government, often despite of who the government is, they still try and make us healthier, better educated and safer. And I think there's a whole thing about the way we do politics here that is really, really positive. And if this really was about that sort of politics, if you're really concerned about the state of the nation, really, before the election, under the previous... I mean, the state of affairs now really is a reflection on the previous government. It's too early for Labour to have any real impact. So if it was about that, the rational thing to do would have been to protest under the previous government. So I think that's why I don't think it's a protest. That's why I think it's totally inappropriate to call it a protest. Now, maybe the fact that Labour are in makes people feel like they're getting less of what they want, that the tone has changed. And I wonder if some people think, well, hang on a minute, you know, we're getting even less of, maybe, you know, there's probably too big an issue to get into. But people's perception of what is and isn't, say, woke. And there's a sense that perhaps, you know, the previous lot, even though we didn't like them, they were more in our wheelhouse. And now that's less the case.
Yeah, we just haven't given enough money to Rwanda to achieve nothing.
I know, what an absolute way. I mean, all that's where, that sort of thing was what drove me mad. Was one, I had a moral opposition to that policy. And what really made me laugh was Tories who supported it would say, oh, well, look, Rwanda's perfectly safe. You're like, but you wouldn't be choosing it if you didn't think. The whole point is that you're saying it's a deterrent. So you know what saying I'll ship you to Rwanda means for people. So don't sort of pretend that, well, you're the one with the issue if you're opposed to it. It was a colossal waste of public money, and it was done entirely for political reasons. There was nothing pragmatic or in the national interest about it. It wasn't going to bring down their small boat crossings, and as we saw Rishi Sunak, they reached their peak. So it was the wrong policy for every conceivable reason. And wasting money like that could have built hospitals, that could have got more police, that could have actually made us safer. I was sick of seeing politics done like that.
Talking of hospitals, I've got to raise the question of your health. So you were here at Edinburgh last year, fit as a fiddle?
Fit as a fiddle, but with really severe nerve pain in my left buttock, so bad that I couldn't sit down or lie down, and I was hobbling around in my flat in cold sweats. I mean, anyone who's ever had a back issue would tell you that nerve pain where you don't dare move a millimetre. So I knew that was unusual. I would never have guessed it was cancer. I went to a doctor. They gave me strong painkillers and suggested getting an MRI because they thought the pain in that part of the leg would be caused by a slip disc in the back. And a couple of days after the Edinburgh Festival, I got the MRI scan back, and there at the base of the spine was cancer. So that was a bit of a shock.
Just a bit of a shock.
Yeah, you know, you have to... I realise it's a big caveat, but apart from the catastrophic nerve pain, there was nothing wrong with me. So I just thought, God, this is unusual. And obviously then quickly you realise that if they're going to get it out surgically, that's not an easy place, that's not soft tissue.
So the base of your spine?
Yeah, and so I had it removed. So it was on a part of the spine called the sacrum, which is this big triangular bone at the base of the spine that plugs the spine into the pelvis. It's also part of your pelvis. So I had all but the top vertebrae carved out and removed on block. So that was a big surgery to recover from.
Wow, massive. And psychologically, I mean, you must have addressed your own mortality in that period.
Yeah, in moments where, I remember at one point, before they knew exactly what sort of cancer it was, they thought it might be a secondary tumour that it metastasised, and I knew enough about cancer to know that would be very bad. And you're talking to a doctor where you don't know what he's going to say next, and in a millisecond you're bargaining your life away. You think, well, maybe he's going to tell me I've got 5 years. And then you think, well, actually, that would be very good. Maybe it's a year. You start to think, well, I'd shake his hand on a year. You're making all these decisions. And actually, there's a calmness that I felt that I was prepared to do. It wasn't even just a calmness. It was almost like my body was talking to me. It was almost like it wasn't my usual internal monologue. It was almost like my body was saying, chop us off. It was almost like my leg, it was almost like every cell of my body was saying, whatever you need to do to live, do it. So I came to a very sort of calm, peaceful conclusion that I'd do whatever it took. And, I had big surgery, but the consequences of it were nowhere near what I feared that they might be at one point.
So you've met me here today, you've got crutches. Is that a permanent feature of your life now?
I don't think so, no. So I was discharged on crutches. I'm now down to walking sticks. I use one stick on stage. And my walking is really improving. So I think, I kind of hope that by the end of the year I might not need them. Maybe that's a bit too ambitious. But I think as my balance improves and my strength recovers, but part of the reason I need them, and I just think this is amazing, is because they remove the base of my spine, that leaves a big old gap. So to cover that gap and to replicate the job that bone did, which takes some of the pressure when you sit down, they create a muscle flap by pulling the muscles across and up from my buttocks and thighs, and creating this thing. So the anatomy of my legs have been rearranged. So as well as wasting away in a hospital bed for 10 weeks, my muscles are in a different place. I'm having to teach them to move differently. And that's partly why I need the stick. So as my strength improves, as that new muscle memory is ingrained, hopefully I won't need them forever.
So we're only talking about being discharged, 8 months ago?
So I was discharged on the 23rd of December, just in time for Christmas, which is great because I love Christmas.
Your mum and dad's anniversary as well.
No way, well there you go, maybe that's why. They said get home for Christmas and for Adrian's mum and dad.
And as far as you know, all clear?
Yes, so I had my 6-month scan a few weeks ago and that was clear. I have to have them every 6 months, and obviously that's the first one that I'd had. And I thought, I feel fairly confident that it won't be there, but when they call your name in the waiting room, the thought crosses your mind. And before I'd even had a chance to sit down, and this is the way to do it, my oncologist said, just to let you know, the scans are great, you're clear. I just thought, yes. And then we just sat down and talked about other stuff to do with it, and I just thought, good. This is not the X Factor, I don't need a dramatic moment. Give me the news big, and then
that'll do me.
Yeah, and then I was straight to the pub afterwards, and that was the tastiest pint I've ever had. It was lovely.
I can see it glowing in your eyes even now. And you're heading out after this Edinburgh Fringe series now, you're heading out on UK tour, rest of 24, 25?
That's right, yes. So I'll do the entirety of the Edinburgh Festival and then I'll tour. The tour starts in Norwich in October and then goes all the way up to, I think Glasgow's the last one, or Aberdeen at the end of March. So it's all, it's just great to be back. It's great to be back working because when you go through something like that, you do have to stop and you do have to be sensible and be a patient and let your body heal and let your mind just focus on that job. But in time, actually, that being your sole focus is very tedious. And you want to get back to, you don't want to be defined by your health. You don't want to be defined by having had cancer. You want to be, you're a journalist or a performer or a comedian as well as a husband and a friend and a son. And you want to get back to being all those things, a football fan and a lover of pubs, and you want to explore those interests again. So just getting back into the full, enjoying what life is in its entirety is just so good for the mind and for the brain.
Listen, it's great to see you looking
You
so
too.
well and sounding so good, Matt. Before we go, just to remind you, we've got some fantastic podcasts these days over at bylineaudio.com. Not just this one. We've got Bonnie Greer and Hardeep Matharu presenting a fantastic series called Adventures in Americana. We've got Otto English and John Mitchinson myth-busting in fine style with Utter Bollocks. And if you take out a premium subscription to bylineaudio.com, you'll also get, as well as additional content from those podcasts, you'll get an ad-free version of this podcast as well. So what are you waiting for? Head over to bylineaudio.com, and when you've done that, book some tickets to go and see Matt Forde when he's on his UK tour later this year and early next year. Cheers, Matt. Take care, mate.
It's so good to see you again. Thank you.
Byline